Welcome to the second in our series of webinars that are actually a lot more like podcasts than webinars, where I'm interviewing people around a theme, and the theme is entrepreneurship in the environment. In the first episode, I interviewed Will Pope, a serial entrepreneur who started, developed or grown and then successfully exited 6 businesses. If you want to listen back to that episode, it's available on the IES YouTube channel. If you search for IES.org, that'll come up. Today, though, I'm interviewing someone at a very different stage of their career, who is at the beginning of their entrepreneurial journey. Joe Freemantle recently co-founded the ambitious startup Green Phoenix Waste Solution and is here to tell us a little bit more about it. Instead of having the Q&A at the end of the session, if you have any questions that you would like me to ask Joe, then please type them in the chat box and I will try and weave them into the conversation that I'm having. Welcome, Joe.
Hello. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Excellent. Thanks for coming. So Joe's going to take us through a few slides to begin with, where he'll tell us a little bit about his background in taking part in a entrepreneurship program called KIC, and telling us a little bit more about Green Phoenix Waste Solutions. So over to you, Joe.
All right, thanks. Well, today I thought it'd be important to introduce you to our team because they are obviously at the core of our company. I'll tell you a bit about their background and basically how we all met and basically how the business flourished from that point. What our joint motivation was, and obviously that centres around the environment. I'll talk to you about our journey and the journey, which was a summer school that where the company was founded, and then we'll reflect on some of the things that I've learned along the way. So the CEO of our company is Thomas Kouroughli. We met on the summer school, the Climate-KIC summer school back in 2015. His background was in PPE. So he's actually now studying his master's in economics in Berlin currently. And he does all the sort of finance and all that kind of thing, but we all wear lots of different hats. Then we've got Samuel Geddes, he was a friend of Tom's, so he didn't actually attend the summer school. But we needed somebody who could basically do a bit of chemical engineering and basically prop up my skill set and basically having Sam there actually really boosted my confidence because he could double check things that I was, sort of coming up with. My background is I studied biology at Aberystwyth University, and then I went on and did a master's in green biotechnology and innovation management. So that was like a 66% green biotechnology with a 33% business innovation, and so that's basically our core team. We have lots of other members who have sort of dipped in at various points in the time frame. But yeah, I'll take you back to the beginning of when our company first started, and you'll see it's actually changed a lot and we pivoted a lot on what we originally set out. So this was at the Climate-KIC summer school. There were originally 5 of us. You'll see me and Tom there, and we have Irene, she was from Portugal, Monica, who was from Peru, and Fiona, actually, and Fiona was absolutely fantastic, and she is Dutch. And this was actually the first business idea we came up with. We were sort of spitballing ideas, and that was actually like a plastic waste recycling company for festivals. And this idea we actually pitched, and it actually got torn apart by the judges for not being ambitious enough, basically.
Okay.
And so then we went back to the drawing board and started looking at how we could come up with new ideas.
So how did you get involved in Climate-KIC? Was it part of your program or was it something that you volunteered for?
So I'd contacted Climate-KIC in March before the summer school because I'd actually just come out of doing my undergrad in biology and I was looking for things for my CV. I knew I was interested in the environment, and I was actually just looking for, as I said, things to boost my CV. And I saw there was a sort of like a seminar, like a training session in Birmingham, and that was called Greening Your Business. I didn't have a business at this point. I had, sort of pie in the sky ideas, and I thought I'd like to go into business in the future. I turned up, and actually there were people with sort of like oil companies and, sort of cargo companies, and I was there, this undergrad who, well, just fresh graduate really, who had no experience. And then the person who was organising it, I said to him, do you have any work experience or anything like that? And he said something that if you've got business aspirations would be really good, would be this summer school. So I went on a few other training courses with Climate-KIC and then applied for this summer school and got accepted. And then that was 2 weeks based at Imperial College in London, 2 weeks at London University in Sweden, and 1 week in Copenhagen, where we did the final pitch of business idea.
Okay, and what's the intake on the school like? Do you know?
It was. I didn't realise quite how competitive it was until I was on there. And we were part of a group. We were Journey 7. There were lots of other journeys going around, largely Europe. Our group was 42 people. We then joined with Journey 8, who were another 42 people for the final week in Copenhagen. So 84 people or thereabouts. And Climate-KIC, the summer schools have been growing each year. Actually, there's been more and more people travelling to lots of different locations, all surrounding this environment theme.
So it's about innovation and environment.
Yes.
And it's as broad a theme as that. You can come up with ideas.
So I was one of the only scientists, or one of the few scientists who actually applied. There were lots of people who actually, there were lots of people who'd come from engineering. There weren't many biologists like myself. There were a couple of chemical engineers, but a lot of people actually came from a business background or an economics background. So that was a bit different.
That's interesting, because one of the main hypotheses that I have for this whole series is that scientists aren't going down the entrepreneurial route. That it's a lot of the innovation that you see in the environment sector is coming from engineers and is coming from people with a kind of business MBA background. So it's quite interesting. You're almost backing up that hypothesis by saying there's only a few scientists on there. But we'll come back to that kind of question about what a scientist brings to a team that might be different a little bit later. So if you continue with your slides.
This was something I thought I'd put in the presentation to assist any future, anybody who actually has any ideas about business, and if they're coming from a science background. We found, I was introduced to this on the summer school. This was the business model canvas, and it really helped us go from an idea of a business to making sure we covered all the bases of what a business entails. So when you're actually pitching for, say, funding or talking to investors, this business model canvas was actually really useful. And yeah, just the disclaimer, I'm not actually being paid to talk about this. These are all free things that are out there, and they were just what we found useful.
So how many competing ideas were you taking into this business model canvas? At what point during that decision-making process were you bringing this in?
So we had lots of different business ideas. Some made the cut, some we didn't. We'd actually, you'll see that our business started off really. Our trajectory for our current business actually started off trying to recycle cigarette butts, which is a very different thing to what we're doing now, which is focusing on nappy waste and female hygiene products and things like that. And yeah, we had lots of different business ideas before that. As I said, the plastic recycling, we were looking at different business models for what we do with these cigarette butts once we've collected them. Do we turn them into furniture? How do we process them? And really the most important part for us was the cellulose that was in the cigarette butts, and that was actually our pivoting point to all these different business models, just looking at cellulose. So that was how we made the movement from cigarette butts to nappy waste.
So how would you focus that kind of pivot point of being cellulose? How would you identify that as being the kind of key driver behind all your ideas?
Well, I think when it started, we had no reason to look for cellulose, as we say, because we were just looking at cigarette butts. And then when we started looking at how we could process those cigarette butts, it became very apparent that it was the cellulose we were looking at. So when we researched the cellulose, we started thinking, well, what else has cellulose, and then that's how we pivoted from there. But we had a Skype conversation during the summer school with a very sort of established entrepreneur who was actually retrofitting the London buses to make them hybrid engines. And we talked to him about our idea of collecting cigarette butts, and one of his comments I can't forget, because he said, you'll have more luck going down the side of everybody's sofa collecting their change than you will getting the cigarette butts and actually being able to monetize that. At the time, actually, I didn't realize just quite how poignant his comments were, because one of the issues that we were having with the cigarette butts is they're so low value, so spread out, that actually you're trying to collect something with very little worth from lots of different regions. So actually, it was very similar to going door to door, trying to get, change. So it was actually a very poignant comment there. It was actually just an off the cuff comment, but it really stayed with us, and that was one of the reasons we then thought, this guy's right. We need to not give up, but we need to maybe take that on board and pivot. One of the first lessons that I learned and that we were introduced to was surrounding yourself with positive people. And I've included some sort of like positivity quotes here, but the top one was a quote that we were told in the summer school, and that was, be a yes and person, not a yes but. And that was an activity we did where you were talking to somebody and you had to try and say yes but to everything that they said, and then you assessed how you felt at the end of the conversation, and then we had yes and then so you're running with those ideas, and there was so much more positivity and a lot more creativity we found came out of actually expanding on other people's ideas and actually saying no, they just won't work. And you find a lot of innovation actually ends with negativity. So this is actually one of the sort of best lessons we've learned, is it's so important to have positive people around you, because if you're a little bit underconfident in your idea or your own skills, you won't go anywhere, because if you surround yourself with people who tell you won't go anywhere. Yeah. So that was a really important lesson.
Because I guess the mind frame is about being solution orientated rather than problem orientated. You quite often get people with the mentality who are very good at sketching out a problem why you shouldn't do something rather than a solution of how you can do something. And I guess that change in inflection from the but to the and is really shifting from the problem to the solution.
And it's interesting that you said about the problem-based approach or the solution-based approach, because I'll be touching on that later, actually. So as I mentioned before, we were looking at cigarette waste, and actually we were looking at turning them into biofuels, and that was an idea that we actually pitched at the end. This was a picture taken just after we finished. So that was the group of us. So there were lots of different teams there. And at that point, I didn't actually know much about biofuels. I had this idea that, we've got cellulose, we can make biofuels, but I didn't actually have any of the technical skills. I had a background in biology, but I hadn't actually got to the level of how would you make biofuels. It's still very much a pie in the sky idea. The science seemed to work to me. Which is why we later then went and approached Sam as the chemical engineer, basically to make sure that I wasn't making any sort of drastic leaps that were unwarranted.
So you had this wider team, so it was obviously distilled down to you and one other guy, and then you introduced Samuel. What happened to the other ones that were on your team?
So as I said because they were based in Peru, the Netherlands, and Portugal, it didn't actually, it just became a bit too logistically difficult to keep them on the team. Whereas me and Tom were both from the UK, so we basically came back after the summer school and carried on working with it. Fiona actually has her own company anyway that's quite successful, and that's in the food waste industry in the Netherlands.
And so is the purpose of the summer school, was it laid out of, it is genuinely an incubator for new companies that at the end of the summer school is expected to spin off a couple of companies, or is it just more about teaching you the process of working out what a good idea is and how you might set it up, and the expectation wasn't really that you would set up a company from it?
It was a bit of both, actually. So they taught you the skills to be able to start a company, or at least, some of the skills that are sort of required. They hoped that you would start a business out of it, because I think that's how it gets funded, is actually how effective is this organisation at bringing new businesses to market. And there were actually quite a lot of startups that carried on out of our cohort. But then a lot of people did come out of the summer school and then go into things that weren't their own business. They went and pursued their original trajectories. So yeah, a bit of both, really.
Okay.
I know I've been talking about sort of the nappy waste, and it comes under the umbrella of absorbent hygiene products. So I think it's just, so everybody's on the same page. That includes your nappies, your female hygiene products, your sanitary pads, and your incontinence products. So yeah, just so we're all on the same page, I thought I'd include that. We mentioned before about the problem approach and how you actually come to actually looking at what is your business going to do. Are you trying to solve a problem? And so we were told to look for problems and create solutions for those problems, because I feel that once you've got a solution to the problem, you've already got a demand, because it's it's a large problem. So our problem that we worked with was, we looked around and we saw that there were 1 million tons of absorbent hygiene products produced in the UK each year that go to landfill. And when you consider the amount of 1 million tons it's 2.5, 3 times the Empire State Building in weight. That's it's an insane amount of weight going to landfill, producing greenhouse gases, and yeah, it's very expensive for local councils. So that's why we started thinking, well, is there something else that we could do with this waste stream? So as soon as we came out of the summer school, Tom actually applied for Climate-KIC. Also hold a greenhouse pre-incubation program, where they provide you with €5,000. It's a 6-month scheme. They have networking events. They give you a business coach as well, which was absolutely fantastic to help really to help you navigate the hurdles of actually bringing your idea to market, and helping you really solidify what the use of your company is in the market. And so this was a picture that was taken when we were actually at COI11, which was the youth event running parallel to COP21, the Paris Climate Agreement. So we were in Paris, and we had our interview lined up. So we'd actually had to sneak off into a little teepee to have our interview for this incubation program, which we then got accepted on in the following December. So after the summer, by the December, we'd been accepted into the greenhouse, and by that point, we'd already decided that we were going to be moving from the cigarette butts to the nappy waste, and that's what we pitched to the greenhouse project, and it started almost immediately.
So, greenhouse project UK based, or?
The greenhouse project, there's a UK hub, then there's also it's all over Europe. So Climate-KIC I think it's funded by the European Union. So there's lots of different countries in Europe that it's actually got partnerships with, and there's lots of different companies that are all running this greenhouse pre-incubator. We had some friends who came from the summer school who then went on to join the greenhouse in Prague, I believe it was, some in Berlin, so there was quite a range of organisations.
So a real attraction of this Climate-KIC and greenhouse approach is around this kind of internationalism, that you have the opportunity to work in different countries. Okay.
Another point that I wanted to mention in this talk was how important having a mentor is. We've now got 2 mentors. Janet, she was our business coach that that was assigned to our group during the greenhouse, and she was absolutely incredible. She helped us navigate things that we didn't really have any experience in. So, like all the legal things. She was helping us refine our business model canvas, and helping us to really move forward in a way that I don't think we would have been able to move forward as quickly without having her as a mentor. Gordon Allison was my tutor when I did my masters. Now, I got very fortunate when I was doing my masters because I had essentially a one-to-one masters. Nobody else was on my course. So I ended up working with Gordon and all of my other lecturers kind of in a one-to-one fashion, not in a I didn't have to sit in lecture theatres. Sometimes I did at the start when and it's a bit strange sitting in a lecture theatre having a lecturer present to you and there's this big empty room behind you.
No chance of sleeping through the lectures.
No, not at all. But Gordon was brilliant. I actually approached him and asked him to be a mentor for our team, and he was more than happy to. And so now, if I have any sort of scientific queries, because he's an analytical biochemist at Aberystwyth University, he's been really supportive and helped us to actually develop our concept. So yeah, a point that I wanted to make about mentors is in American culture there seems to be more of a mentorship idea. There's you go out and you look for a mentor who's going to help you navigate these things, and I feel in the UK this isn't as it's not widely accepted practice to go out and just find somebody and say, you're on a trajectory that I would like to get onto myself, and would you be able to just help me out, basically? And I think so I think mentors are really important to starting a new business, specifically as a scientist as well, because I think depending on where you're at as a scientist, you may have just done your undergrad like me, and I still felt that there were lots of other scientists who'd done masters, who'd done PhDs, and I didn't feel very confident in my sort of knowledge. I still felt like a very green scientist, and so having somebody there who just gives you that little bit of confidence or could suggest ideas of things that you've not come across, because they've got their career's been going for much longer. So yeah, whatever a mentor is to you, I feel that that's a very important thing they're important people to seek out.
Okay.
So currently we are, Green Phoenix is associated with London Southbank University, and this is jumping ahead to where we're at currently. We are we found another scheme called Access to Innovation, and when we left the greenhouse, that ended not last April, but the April previous, so April 2017. We were then looking for ways to fund ourselves, because we, in a tech startup, you need to actually have access to funds. And one of the biggest problems that we had was getting lab space. We were looking all around the London area, and nobody seemed to have any free labs. And what our original intention was for me and Sam to go into the labs and actually carry out the experiments ourselves. And London Southbank, through the Access to Innovation scheme, said to us, we will provide you with labs and we will also provide you with a team to carry out your experiments. And so, we jumped at that. I mean, there was a little bit of caution because you're worried about people sort of taking your idea and running with it. And I think that's something that, as a scientist, I feel that if you've got a proof of concept that you've got, you do need to exercise caution when you talk to people. So have your non-disclosure agreement signed and all, those kinds of things. That was a lesson we were taught. I didn't know anything about that before I started. But yeah, so we work with London Southbank now, and that's where we currently are. And they are helping us to develop our technology to the next level so we can start to move it to market.
So it feels like on your journey, you've been heavily tied in with universities. Did you ever explore any other kind of access to funds, like venture capital funding?
So actually, we did look at venture capital funding. We didn't have any formal applications. There were lots of discussions and things like that. But because of where we were with our technology, we didn't go through venture capitalists because, I guess, because if you haven't got your proof of concept at that point, then it's actually quite, it's a little bit more difficult to actually be able to get the funds out, really. And we worked with universities because they could give us access to the things that we needed. So we actually just happened to go through universities rather than just targeting universities. These were, when we were looking for where we could find funds, these were the organisations that actually came forward. A brilliant moment for us was in 2017 in January. We got covered by Aberystwyth University approached me and said, as an alumni, we like what you're doing. We'd like to talk about it. And then the BBC picked up on that and then carried on with this story. And that has been very useful for us because it then meant that people could find us. And so we actually started making a lot more networks, and also having a sort of like name like the BBC actually started to make us look like we were a lot more established, which was really useful to when you're talking to people. They want to know you're serious and you're not just going to sort of.
Okay, for a minute, can we ramp up the science elements of it? Because we have a scientific audience listening, so they'll be comfortable enough with this. So what is it that's unique in your process about that separation of the waste that article is dealing with?
Yes, so what is novel about our process is we started to look deeper into the nappy waste and started looking at its individual components. And then we started looking at separation technologies, and we started looking at what other organisations were doing, and we found that they were extracting plastics largely and through sort of very different engineering routes. That's what they were really focusing on, and we came from it from a more chemical engineering perspective. So we were looking at a very different set of chemicals to actually be able to extract this cellulose from this material, which is what it really our business model hinges on. So as I said before, when we were looking at the biofuels, that was the cellulose, and I actually had knowledge of later on I developed the knowledge of actually how to procure biofuels from nappy waste. And actually my master's dissertation, because I had so much freedom in my master's, I actually fermented the nappy waste materials to produce ethanol, and we got quite good yields with that. So we knew that was already one sort of viable route. Um, but yeah, so that's where we're at now in terms of the. So obviously, I can't talk too heavy about what it is, what the chemicals are that we're using, or but I can say that it is a chemical solution, as opposed to an engineering solution.
Okay, you've already mentioned it, but in terms of defending your intellectual property, your IP, how do you go about that? Are you at the stage yet where you're patenting things, or?
At this moment in time, in the very near future, we are going to be approaching patents and things like that. So for us, it was very important to work within, I guess, sort of closed networks. We worked through using like non-disclosure agreements, and those are the that's the only sort of protection we had. Other than that, they end up being sort of like trade secrets where you just don't talk about them. And actually, that was quite an interesting point, because how do you make somebody interested in your idea if you can't talk about the technology behind it? Because that's really what, to me as a scientist, that's the most exciting part of what we're doing. So it's balancing those two aspects, is talking about it and being able to actually procure funds because you've talked about it, and actually keeping a tight lip to the
So there's a next phase where you probably go get that intellectual property defended, and then you can go out into the world.
And then that will be the investment.
And the investment stage. So when are you hoping that will take place?
I'm hoping, if all goes well, October this year. That's the projected. That's the projection so far.
Excellent.
So the points that the major challenges that we've had, I've mentioned lab space before. That was incredibly difficult. That actually put us back months trying to find lab space. And I can imagine any scientist with a solution that actually requires using lab space, that's actually something that, unless you've got a lot of money behind you to actually be able to afford the lab space, it's actually quite difficult and time consuming, and often that can be quite frustrating. So that's why we went through this access to innovation scheme, and I would thoroughly recommend it to any scientists moving forward to actually look at schemes where they will provide you with labs, because that was actually a bit of a nightmare for us, because you have this new technology. The BBC had already covered what we were doing. We were then struggling to find lab space, and that was quite a frustrating point, because you're worried about other people seeing this article and saying, right, we'll come up with something that's doing the same thing just differently, and then where do you sit? So actually, it's this race to.
That's interesting, because there's lots of government-funded schemes around innovation in certain areas. So you'll get areas like the Silicon Roundabout, where money will pour in to ensure that there's office space available to coders, that they have free evening classes, and the support network and financing as well. You have your fintech clusters. Is there kind of a science cluster for budding entrepreneurial companies like you, where you can have access to that type of service?
So actually, where we've come from, the access to innovation scheme was great, but we haven't actually found a lot in the way of actually developing science. It's funny that you actually mentioned, the whole sort of Silicon group, or the Silicon Valley, because that was a point that I wanted to make, was as a scientist with no money backing you, you've then got to try and find this backing, and if you haven't got a proof of concept, it's actually quite frustrating and difficult to actually access these funds. So, as soon as you've got your proof of concept, money is not an issue, and we were actually, we were told, if you've got a good idea, the money finds you, and that's what we're that's basically what we're hoping. We actually have got investors lined up after we get our proof of concept, sort of like nailed and patented, basically. But yeah, that's something that I would say needs to be more widely advertised, is for science startups.
Okay, so that's the lab space challenge, and then
Coordinating remotely, that was an issue for us because we came back from this summer school. I was based in the Midlands, around the Birmingham, Worcester area. My business partners, Tom and Sam, they came from Southampton. As I mentioned before, Tom is now doing his master's in Berlin. So we've actually always really been working remotely, and so for for our tech startup, when me and Sam were developing this process and working on the idea, it all had to be done remotely. And if everybody has different jobs as well, so everybody has different availabilities, and so the reason why I put a link to Asana there was this was a piece of software that our business coach recommended to us.
probably so project management.
Yes,
isn't it?
basically.
Yeah.
So you can just give tasks to each other, and then you can tick off when you've done them. And that was a really useful tool for organising us as well, because we don't have like a project organizer because we're so small. And knowledge gaps as well. That was something that was a big challenge for us. Was we had these ideas, we'd found some technology that we wanted to work with, but the technology that we are looking at is so new and it's so not scaled up at the moment. There's some startups that are working with it, but how do you access that information because it's not done, if that makes sense? So we found networking was brilliant, which is why I've included a networking picture, because a brilliant way to actually find out the information that you need is to talk to people. Again, be cautious with who you talk to. But Climate-KIC do have these sorts of events where you can go and network with other people, and it's very much an environment of everyone wants to help each other and everybody wants to succeed, because this was in the environment, so everybody wants this green goal. And I think that's something that you may not find as much in other sectors, because there's this everybody has this internal drive to want to make the environment, basically just save the environment, without using the cliche term save the environment. But
if people can hear some background noise, we're having a very dramatic thunderstorm at the moment, so no need to be alarmed. That's what the the big rumble is in the background. Okay, so we've talked about the science a little bit, let's talk about the business model now. So is the expectation that the cellulose that you'll get out of these products sufficient to pay for the whole model? Is the expectation that the biofuel at the end of it will pay?
We pivoted again. So originally we were looking at biofuels, and now we are going to be looking at just pure cellulose, but at commodity grade, which has got a net worth, a market value. These figures are a couple of years old now, but it's hovering around the sort of $500 to $600 per ton, which is quite a lot. But because we are diverting waste from landfill, you then the intention is, if you can save local governments money, that basically instead of the governments at the moment have to spend money to go to send this waste to landfill. Mm-hmm. So instead of sending it to landfill, you can charge them for delivering it to you. So those are two of the biggest revenue streams that we would be looking at. So
the expectation was that you wouldn't get involved at all in the collection of it. It would be usual kind of waste separation at a local authority level, local waste recycling plants, or they might set up some sort of kind of unique collection method of doing it. You think about the kind of sanitary bins that exist within most toilets, that type of thing, and you would use those streams, have them delivered to you, and then...
Yeah, so there is a Welsh organisation that does collect them separately, and we've contacted them, and that's how we're doing our preliminary tests. So we're seeing what their waste stream is. I mean, they are actually making products out of them, but we've said to them, you're making this. can we have a look at it, and can we make it more valuable, basically? So the actual originally when we started, we were thinking about this was another important lesson we learned, was we started looking at the whole kind of supply chain. We were originally thinking we're going to do the collection, we're going to do the processing, we're going to do the selling, and really at that point you need to focus on what is your actual value. What are you offering people? And that was something that our business coach actually helped us to sort of like smooth out, I want to do everything, because there is that sort of drivers. When it's your own company, you want to do everything, but we've now focused in on, this is our value, this is what we can offer to people, and and then we can fit into lots of different supply chains, and we can then take this technology abroad and help people to be able to do it there. And then it's actually given us a lot of flexibility in future business models on how we want to scale up. So rather than saying we're going to build our big factories, we could in the future say we will license out our technology to you and you can do it, and that would be a completely different business model and much quicker to actually to get to market, really, because our motivation is we wanted to do something for the environment. So we want to realistically scale up as big as possible, as quick as possible, and basically, not by any means necessary, but really, we're very open to how we would actually scale up.
So that's interesting. Your primary motivation is sustainability, as opposed to any attempts to enrich yourselves and your colleagues?
Basically, yes.
Okay. Do you think that leads to you having a different kind of mind frame in terms of time scales and how you approach the project?
I think so, yes, because I think it's meant that when we have approached these groups, because our motivation is to scale up quickly, and it's probably led us to, we're not good, we all have a sort of percentage share of the company and things like that, which we all do actually have this sort of independent view. But in the future, we've talked about the idea of saying, well, if this is going to scale up, then we could just, if there was a big cash injection, we could not necessarily sell the idea, but we could sort of look at, we're just basically just going to look at our hand and see what is the best thing for the company, really, but also for the environment. We're not going to hold ourselves back because we're trying to collect as much money as possible, because we're not.
This is sometimes the criticism of UK entrepreneurs, is that they say that they're too keen to sell out early on, and that part of the problem in the UK is that we do a great deal of the kind of basic science, the idea formulation, but we allow other people to grow these into kind of multinational unicorns. So yes, that was just an observation rather than looking for any response from you. Cheryl Miles points out that lab space is available at the biopark part of the University of Hertfordshire, so that might be something worth exploring, both for yourself and anyone else listening who's thinking about setting up an organisation. So this is a company very much exists in the space of the circular economy, doesn't it? Is that the inspiration behind the logo?
Yes, it was. Yes, the circular economy. Actually, the name Green Phoenix came from. It was actually quite a cheesy. It was when we were looking at the cigarette butts, and that was when the name Green Phoenix, we had to pitch with something, and there was that cheesy tagline. Was it driven from the ashes? Because it was like cigarette butts, and we were looking at biofuels, and then it's that little cheesy tagline. But then, obviously, now we've moved on. We just sort of kept the idea.
Okay. What did you wish you knew at the beginning of the process that you know now?
How long it was going to take. As I said, we started this in 2015. I wished that I had known basically how important it was to do the networking, because the networking is really something that I think has helped us to reach where we are. I think those are the two largest points.
Okay. So you mentioned that you did it as, was it a third of your masters? Yes. Was about innovation. So there's a question of how much innovation and entrepreneurship was taught to you, or how much it was kind of inherent within your personality. Do you think entrepreneurs are born, or are they made?
This is a very interesting question. I think they are. I think it's a combination of both. I think there were studies done into how to basically looking for genetic markers for sort of more risk takers and things like that. And some people may say to you that entrepreneurs, in fact, aren't risk takers. They are actually. It's a very they make bold decisions, but they're not necessarily as risk-taking. They might appear risk-taking, they're not. So I studied entrepreneurship after I'd already started my business. So because my master's started about 2 weeks after I'd already started Green Phoenix, and I'd already wanted to start a business for a long time. I approached the summer school because I already had a business plan which was completely different. That was in urban farming. So I approached it with that and thought I was going to be developing this urban farming idea. But then when we got into groups, people wanted to create a new, fresh idea that was really ours and not sort of an idea that I had people working. Do you know what I mean? So that was so in response to your question, it's a bit of both.
Okay. Because part of what this webinar series is trying to explore is to try and encourage our environmental science community to be a bit more entrepreneurial, because of the ability of startups and of companies to take to market things that will transform society. So if there were some listeners who are at the moment are kind of in a research environment or an applied science environment, what pieces of advice would you give them to start on that journey? To give them the confidence maybe to do something a little bit different to what they're currently doing?
A point that I made earlier, which I think is the first starting point, is creating an environment of positivity where you want to talk about new business ideas. And when somebody actually approaches you, listen to them and see how you can build on them. I mean, that's not saying don't critique them. But if you were to critique them, do it in a way that helps build the idea, positive criticism, not negative. That's the first thing. The second thing, the mentorship is really important. Also, understanding your own motivation. Why is it that you actually want to start this business? It may not be that you're interested in sort of saving the environment, but really you need a motivation that's going to be able to carry you when things don't go your way, because we've had so many failures already, and that is it. Well, I say failures, they were what I refer to as our pivotal points where we had to pivot to get around it. And I remember hearing there was no such thing as a technological impossibility. So I really internalized that, and as soon as we hit a technological hurdle, you pivot. You don't sort of think, well, this is never going to work. So I think you've got to sort of understand the motivation behind why you're doing what you're doing, and that will carry you through the rough patches.
Our last guest, Will, was very keen to point out that entrepreneurship is quite often framed within the concept of having ideas. But he said from his experience, the real bit of entrepreneurship is doing something with that idea, growing the business beyond it. One essentially is, I guess, the innovator or the inventor, and one is actually the entrepreneur. Does the next phase of Green Phoenix, which is about taking it to market, scaling it, does that excite you as much as the ideas phase?
Oh, that's a very good question. I really do enjoy innovating, and that's something that I like to think about things. On those personality tests that you can score, that you can do. I was the plant, where I would be in a group and I would create an idea, and often the personality types, depending on how you sort of view them, like taking them with a pinch of salt, but often the personality type that I sort of fit into struggles to carry on ideas. And that's why I would emphasize, for me personally, it is still very exciting, and I treat each new sort of stage in the business as a new thing, and that's how I keep myself motivated. But I also need my team around who can help to motivate me, because I think it's natural for everyone to go through peaks and troughs of motivation. Some days you just think, oh, this is just so difficult. Why don't I just go and get a sort of like normal 9 to 5 or whatever? But then when you're at your, your sort of your peak, where things are going well, where there's, your technology is developing, your business is gaining momentum. That's something that I think there's that sense of ownership, and I think that's very rewarding.
Okay, we've had a question come in from Medina, who asks, can someone launch an environmental startup without having a science background?
Absolutely, yeah. You don't need to be a scientist to start a startup in the environment. A couple of business models that were thrown around on the business school. The team that won at the end, they got the most positive results. They were a company called Weepoo, and they essentially were. They created a company that was essentially collecting and washing nappies for newborns, and they were a Polish. Well, actually, no, they weren't all Polish, but yeah, I think the idea was it was going to be set up in Poland originally. So another environmental startup could be, I met a lady who's operating in London. She had a social enterprise which was looking at taking youths who'd had sort of troubled pasts, and basically turning them into beekeepers and selling honey, and taking them out of sort of this the gang culture which they were originally in, as a rehabilitation program. And obviously that you could consider that as an environmental startup, but it's it's not scientific. And there's so many different avenues that you could go down. It's a really exciting field.
Sure. I noticed your very last point on the slide is business isn't just about Silicon Valley. There is an attempt, I think, right around the world, really, to echo the successes in the United States around building a cluster around what's seen as the de rigueur business at the moment, which is kind of coding and platforms and business platforms. But especially for the UK, the strength is very much in science. So what would you like to see happen externally to your own company to make sure that more science startups take place within this country?
Well, I think something like what you're doing here, where you're actually creating the discussion of scientists and entrepreneurship. That's something that I do very much support, because there is that sort of idea that scientists aren't creative, when in actual fact I find a lot of scientists are very creative. And I think I think there needs to be more awareness that you can go from science into business. I don't think that was mentioned at all during my biology degree. That was mentioned during my masters, but as I said, I was the only person who did my masters. So there were very few courses actually that did that split, put science with business. It's quite unheard of. So I think there needs to be a lot more awareness of that, and a lot more visibility of funding. I mean, there may be a lot of funding, but it's actually quite difficult to find it. And one of the ways that we actually find funding is through competition funding. Now, something that was a massive personal hurdle was all the public speaking involved. That was something that I used to dread, having to do presentations. And don't get me wrong, I don't find them easy now, but I find that it's a lot. Those sorts of skills need to be encouraged within scientists to actually bring them into business.
Okay, excellent. So we're going to wrap up now, but I think I'm probably echoing the sentimentalities and thoughts of our listeners when I say that we will watch with great interest what happens to Green Phoenix next. And I hope the next stage goes smoothly and you are able to scale this. Fascinating to talk to someone at the beginning of the journey. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. And I've found it very admirable that you have this kind of entrepreneurial drive. So thank you, Joe.
Yeah, thank you for having me.